Hey, everybody, I'm Patrick Verano. I'm the host of the podcast Learning from Leaders, and I'm also the CEO of Emory Leadership Group. And on the anniversary of 9/11, as those of us left behind remember those that were lost, I wanted to talk about resilience, and not just resilience, but really going beyond resilience. And I think there is a step even beyond resilience. And I wanted to start off by talking about, I'm sure many of us have been watching different clips and shows in regards to 9/11. There was an article that I had come across about a week ago in the Wall Street Journal, and I'm actually going to read the title of it. I've got it in front of me here. It was September 4th. It said, "What 9/11 taught us about trauma and resilience." It said, "Distress is a normal reaction to mass tragedy, but so is a relatively prompt climb back to good mental health." And what's interesting about this is that obviously when 9/11 happened, and we can probably all remember where we were at that moment, there were a lot of studies that were going on, and therapists and psychologists and psychiatrists concerned, like, what is going to happen from here? And there was an epidemiologist that did a study shortly after that looking at people in Manhattan who were experiencing clinically diagnosed post-traumatic stress disorder, who would fit that criteria. And upwards of 30% of those that were surveyed were experiencing clinically diagnosed post-traumatic stress disorder. Yet what was found 6 months later in a follow-up was that less than 1% still were experiencing that. And I think that speaks so strongly to not only resilience, but I think beyond resilience, and how we deal with that. There were a couple other points that I wanted to mention here. It says, if we shift our focus from what we expect to go wrong to what actually goes right, we might begin to understand just what makes people resilient. And again, the author of this article was Dr. Bonanno. And he actually has a book that has just come out. It's called The End of Trauma: How the New Science of Resilience is Changing How We Think About PTSD. And one of the interesting things that I'm going to speak to later on is by a book that was written by a gentleman named Nassim Nicholas Taleb. And the book is called Antifragile. And in that book, it talks about post-traumatic growth, not post-traumatic stress disorder, but post-traumatic growth. How do we take those things, those stressors, and we actually create what I would call, or what has been called, eustress out of them? They're beneficial to us. We find a way to benefit. And I'm going to talk about a few different ways that we do that. In a lot of the work that I do with individuals, especially over the last year and a half with COVID and the stress that has provided for people, what I have done is I created a series of workshops around how do you build resilience. And there are a number of different approaches that I provide in terms of how people can create resilience. And I'm not going to talk about all of those on this. I want to talk about a couple things. One is a journal that I created, which was based on a lot of research. In particular, one individual, Sean Aker, who had what was called the 21-Day Happiness Challenge. And he talked about 5 activities. And I've taken that happiness challenge and also other research that backs up each one of those activities and put it into what I call the Power Journal. And that will be available to anybody that wants this journal for free. It takes each of those 5 activities, and what I did was I turned it into an acronym. So POWER is the acronym for those 5 activities that Sean Aker used in this 21-Day Happiness Challenge. And what's interesting about this is that 6 months later, when people were asked to self-report on their level of happiness, those that had gone through this 21-Day Happiness Challenge reported themselves as being happier 6 months later. And I do think there's a lot of relevance to it. As I go through these, I will say that in the morning, I do most of these things, and they take less than, if you were to follow the study itself, they take less than an hour. So it's like a power hour, and you don't even have to do them all at the same time. The first one in the Power Journal, in that study as well, was around gratitude. So it's praise, right, is the P in power. What people were asked to do is write down 3 things in the morning that you're grateful for, right? It seems so simple. 3 things you're grateful for. The challenge here is to think of 3 different things every day. So first 3 days, pretty easy, right? I can think of Three things I'm grateful for. Even if I'm in a bad mood, I can probably force myself. The real power of this comes if you think about it from, say, day 15. Now I've had to think about 45 different things that I'm grateful for. Now, to me, the benefit of that is if we think of ourselves as being in a bad place, right? Things aren't going well for me. What do? I go down this rabbit hole of thinking of how bad things are. And there's a contagion to that. But when I force myself to think of things that are going well, what am I grateful for? It's very difficult to be sad or anxious or angry at the same time as thinking of what I'm grateful for. And these don't have to be these massive, um, you know, things that you're grateful for. It could be, I woke up this morning. It was beautiful when I went out. Maybe it's the rain that I'm grateful for because it's been dry for so long. Whatever it is, there are ways that we can find things that we're grateful for. To me, the biggest challenge here, or a benefit, is when we can start looking at the challenges that we're faced with and being grateful for those, right? So maybe it's through some of the things that are going on with my environment right now. I'm grateful for this because it's forcing me to reevaluate my life and what I want, or to take a different look at a relationship that I have with somebody else. You can be grateful for those challenges. And when we do that, we take the power away from that challenge, no pun intended, but we're able to start harnessing that challenge. So the next behavior that we talk about, or activity, is the O in this, which is about others. It's about doing things for other people. Now, in the journal, I talk about and reference research around things like volunteering. We know when we do for others, how important that is. And not only it makes us feel better, but it provides value to other people. This is not just about me, it's about other people. Being for others is so important, right? And that was part of that trial, or that study, was that people had to do something for somebody else. It might be send a note to somebody that you haven't talked to in a while, or tell somebody that has been significant in your life what that has meant to them, right? There are different ways to do this. The next one is about writing. That's the W in the Power Journal. And in the 21-day challenge, what people were asked to do is write 2 to 3 sentences, or maybe 2 to 3 minutes, about what went well over the last 24 hours. Now, what I ask people to do in the work that I'm doing with them individually is do this at the end of the day. And for me, the reason that I ask them to do that is it's like bookending your day, right? We start out in a place of gratitude, right? We wake up and we're thinking about, what are we grateful for today? And then we end our day in this place of what went well today. Because if you think about it, and I'm guilty of this, is that if I'm not focused on that, maybe I'm focused on the opposite. I'm thinking, what didn't I get done today? What challenges do I have ahead of me tomorrow? Maybe it was a disagreement or an argument that I had with somebody today, and I'm ruminating about that. And when we think about that, it's the worst thing I want to do before I go to bed, because sleep is about restoration. And we know how important that is in terms of it's like a computer that goes into sort of rebooting itself. That's what we're doing in the middle of the night. And if I go to bed in a place of anxiety or anger or fear, whatever that might be, as opposed to gratitude, it's probably not going to weigh well on my level of sleep, certainly, and my ability to really create a healthier lifestyle. So that's the W in this. The E in the model is around exercise. And in the 21-day happiness challenge, it was only 10 minutes a day. 10 minutes a day, that's a walk around the block. How important that was. Now, I pull in a bunch of different research that looks at the impact of exercise on our cognitive function. And we know that very short bursts of exercise can have significant impact on our ability to cognitively remember, to work problems out. It's really important for us. Another study that I will often reference is one that was done with patients that had been diagnosed with a major depressive episode. So these weren't just patients or individuals that said, I'm not really happy today. These were patients that were clinically diagnosed as being depressed. In this trial that I mentioned, there were 3 different arms to this, 3 different groups. In one group, the participants only took an antidepressant. and it was Zoloft. In the second group, patients took Zoloft plus they exercised either 3 or maybe 4 days a week for 30 minutes. And in the last group, the participants only exercised for 3 to 4 days a week, 30 minutes a day. Now, at the end of 4 months, they found that the group that exercised alone did better than the Zoloft group or the group that did exercise with Zoloft. And when they followed up even 10 months later, the same thing. They found that the exercise group did better than the other two arms or other two groups that were being evaluated. Now, that's not to say that if you take an antidepressant that you just stop and start working out 3 to 4 days a week, but it certainly gives power to or credibility to how important exercise is, movement is for us. And if we think about many people over the last year and a half, how isolation has probably reduced that, gyms being closed, whatever it might be. And we look, you don't have to look far to see some of the studies in regards to obesity, how it has increased even in children over the last year and a half because of inactivity and how important that is. The last activity is the R in this model, which stands for relaxation. But in the trial, what they did was, or in the challenge, what they did was they had people for 2 minutes, just find 2 minutes of quiet time during the day. Pretty simple to do, right? I just need to find a place that's quiet and maybe I just reflect on my breathing. Maybe I do what's called square breathing, where I breathe in for 4 seconds, I hold it for 4 seconds, I let it out for 4 seconds, and then I start over. And all we're trying to do is slow things down. There's so much research right now in regards to mindfulness and the power that mindfulness provides to us. A lot of benefits in terms of health and mental and cognitive and emotional. In the journal that I have, I give a list of a number of different ways that you can practice this last one, because I think it's probably the most difficult for people to wrap their head around. How do I do this? It seems so complicated. It's not. It's very easy to do. And all you need is a very small amount. So for me in the morning, what I do is something called intermittent silence. And the benefit of that for me is that for 10 minutes, I'm just really focused on breathing in and out of my nose and being aware of the sounds around me. Just being around of the sounds around me. And during that time, I might visualize, I might think of what I'm working on, the success of a project or what I want to have materialized. To me, there's great benefit, and I do these all in the morning. From there, what I want to talk about is another activity that you can do, and this is based on what they call cognitive behavioral therapy. And specifically, what I want to mention here is what's called the thought record. And again, I've got one of the slides I printed out because I do think this can provide us so much value. And if we think about what happens to us, we create situations where we catastrophize. We think the worst case scenarios of what's going to happen. And in this cognitive behavioral therapy, the thought record exercise, what we do is we challenge our thoughts, right? That's all we're doing. So rational responses, challenge your thoughts in a helpful, realistic, and balanced way. So there's a checklist here. And again, I'll provide resources to this, but you can certainly Google cognitive behavioral therapy or CBT thought record, and you'll come up with a number of examples on this. This one, it says, what is the evidence that my automatic thought is true or untrue, right? We get so caught up in thinking that what we're thinking is actually going to happen. Well, this creates an environment where we start to challenge ourselves. Okay, let me look at this and say, what's the evidence that says this is true, but also that this isn't true? This isn't going to happen. And I think that's probably the more important part. What's the worst, best, and most realistic thing that can happen or that will happen, right? We automatically go where? We go to the worst case, right? This thing is immediately going to be a tragedy, as opposed to looking at what's the best case scenario here. It starts to slow us down again and realize that maybe this isn't going to be as bad as we think, right? The next one, could I live through it? Could I live through it? The next one, what's the bigger picture? The next one, am I thinking in all or nothing terms? And again, I think we find ourselves very binary on this. It's either black or white, right? It's all or nothing. When in reality, it's not. There are probably many shades of gray in terms of how we interpret this. This checklist is just providing us an opportunity to sort of put the brakes on. Let's slow this thing down and really, really pull this thing apart and look at what are we dealing with. So the next one, what can I do to solve the problem, right? So now that we've started to frame shift and look at this things differently, we can now say, okay, what can I do about this to solve this, right? And then lastly, what difference will this make in 2 weeks or 10 years? And put whatever days you want in there. But what I think is important here is we can probably all think of situations or experiences that we've had that when we were in that moment, we thought things will never get worse than this. My life is over, this relationship's over, my career's over, whatever it might be. And we can probably look back on that a year later and hopefully, and many of us will chuckle and think, boy, remember that? I thought that was so bad. And look at how much I've grown from this. Look at what's come from this since that happened. I think that's the key to this. Here's where we go from, coping, which is just learning to deal with it, right? I'm just trying to get through this, to resilience, which is about bouncing back, being able to recover from something. Next, it's about going beyond this, right? And to me, that's the real power here. It's to take whatever pain that we have and we turn it into power. We leverage this. Our pasts are they're our greatest advantage if we choose to look at them that way. Our past is our power. So the next piece that I want to talk about here is what's called the Jack Pine Pine Cone. Again, another example that I use, and it starts to talk about this idea of going from resilience to really what I'm going to talk about later, this idea of antifragility. It's those things that get stronger in the face of adversity. And really, that's what we need to look at. How do we get stronger from this? Not just be able to deal with it. How do we get stronger from this? So with the Jack Pine Pine Cone, and you can Google this as well, is that the seeds within the pine cone need heat to release. That's the only way the glue, so to speak, that's on these, the pitch or the sap that's holding this shut, it needs heat, extreme heat often, to open up so it drops the seed to be able to create new growth, right? Oftentimes this happens in a forest fire, right? Catastrophic, right? We think this is so bad, yet this is what the Jack Pine Cone needs to be able to create a new tree. I don't think this is that far off from our lives, in that stress in our lives, those things that I think are most difficult, we don't want to go through them. Who wants to be in a forest fire? That if we change our perspective on things, those can be opportunities, maybe not right in the beginning, but those can be the opportunities that provide us the greatest opportunity for growth. I do a talk for high school kids once a year at this retreat for a youth leadership group that I'm involved with. And I talk about both your past is your power and rising above your best. And I go back and use a GPS as an example. And when we think about a GPS, right, if it's in our car or on our phone, if it tells me to go in a certain direction and tells me to take a right on a street and I pass that street, what does the GPS do? It simply says recalculating, and it tells me the next street to go down. And the time, my arrival time might change, right? Might get a little longer, but it's still telling me, okay, you got to recalculate. You got to go this way. Well, if I walked past that street, it's going to do the same thing. It will recalculate me to the next street. And the time might be a little longer, but it's still focusing on getting me to the destination. We can do the same thing ourselves, but we often don't. If we're thinking about the GPS right now, at no point does that GPS say, stop walking, stop driving. You're not qualified to get to where you want to go. Give it up. You're not smart enough to drive this vehicle or walk in this direction to get where you want to go. It doesn't do that. It will just continue to recalculate. We need to look at ourselves the same way, right? But what do? We make a mistake, something it doesn't go our way, and we start to think, I don't have the right tools. I don't have the right education, the right certification. I don't have enough money. I'm not good looking enough. I'm too tall. I'm too short. I'm too heavy. I'm a female. I'm a male. Whatever it might be, is we start to look at why we can't do something as opposed to recalculating. The difference here is when we think about resources and resourcefulness, right? We all lack resources. Every one of us. There's something that we might need that we don't have. What we all have equal access to is resourcefulness. Every one of us can find a way to get there. It's probably one of our greatest untapped potentials, is being resourceful, finding ways around that. So I want us to remember that, right? How important that is. And then, as I mentioned in this book by Nassim Nicholas Taleb, it's called Anti-Fragile. I've got a copy of it right here. I've read this probably 3 months ago. One of the most thought-provoking books I've read in the last year. And the subtitle of it is Things That Gain from Disorder. And I think it's so relevant right now, is that it is about being anti-fragile, right? That when we try and protect ourselves and prevent ourselves from feeling the suffering that we might have to feel, or the pain that we might have to go through, we actually do ourselves a disservice. We make ourselves weaker over the long run. An interesting one, and not to get political on this, I just read an article yesterday in the Wall Street Journal. It was talking about the flu season this year, and how they're thinking that the flu season is going to be much worse this year. And it goes on to talk about how, because people were isolated and weren't around other people, that there's less resistance that they have in their own bodies, right? Our immune system is very much structured on needing to experience pathogens to be able to fight them off. I mean, really, that's vaccines. The theory on a vaccine is that you give people a little bit of whatever that virus is, and that's what makes you stronger. You've got to be exposed to it to get stronger. When we're exposed to challenges, we become stronger in the end. We have that ability. It's in us to be able to do that. But it's a choice too. We've got to be able to reflect and look on it in that way. So I hope you found this valuable and helpful. Again, there's not one way to do this. There are a number of ways to build resilience. And again, I look at this beyond resilience. How do we really leverage this to gaining power and strength from those challenges? And we all have that ability. So until the next live broadcast, I hope you're able to go out there and take some of this information and utilize it. Again, we remember those from 9/11 today, those that we've lost. And I hope you're able to go out there and rise above your best.